Sarah Mitchell never imagined her life would crumble on a Tuesday. The morning started like any other in their suburban Boston home. Coffee brewing, toast burning slightly, her husband James scrolling through his phone at the breakfast table. 15 years of marriage had created a rhythm, a predictable dance of morning routines and evening rituals. She poured his coffee exactly how he liked it, 2 sugars and a splash of cream, and placed it beside his plate. He didn't look up. That silence should have warned her. The way his jaw clenched when she asked about his day. The way his eyes slid away from hers when she mentioned their anniversary next month. But Sarah had become an expert at ignoring the signs, at painting over the cracks in their foundation with forced smiles and hopeful thinking. The truth arrived in a text message that wasn't meant for her eyes. James had left his phone on the counter while he showered, and it lit up with a message that stopped Sarah's heart. The words were intimate, familiar, belonging to a relationship that had clearly existed for months. Maybe longer. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through conversations that proved her marriage had been a lie for at least a year. When James emerged from the bathroom, towel around his waist and steam following him into the bedroom, Sarah sat on the edge of their bed holding his phone like evidence at a crime scene. The confrontation was ugly. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize in any meaningful way. Instead, he seemed relieved, as if she had finally discovered a secret he was tired of keeping. He loved someone else. He had loved someone else for a long time. He wanted a divorce. The next 3 months dissolved into a nightmare of lawyers and division of assets and whispered conversations at dinner parties where friends chose sides. Sarah stopped sleeping. She lost 20 pounds she didn't have to lose. Her reflection became a stranger with hollow eyes and sharp cheekbones. Her sister Emma called every day, worried, pleading with her to eat something, do something, go somewhere. The panic attacks started during the divorce proceedings. Sitting in the lawyer's office, Sarah's chest would tighten until she couldn't breathe, until the room spun and darkened at the edges. She would excuse herself to the bathroom and splash cold water on her face, trying to remember how to exist in a world where everything she had built had been demolished. When the divorce was finalized, Sarah found herself alone in an apartment she could barely afford, surrounded by boxes she couldn't bring herself to unpack. Her marriage certificate, now void, sat on top of a pile of documents that represented the death of her old life. She was 42 years old and had no idea who she was anymore. Every plan she had made, every dream she had nurtured, had included James. Without him, she was unmoored, drifting in an ocean with no shore in sight. Emma suggested therapy. Sarah went twice and stopped. The therapist wanted her to talk about her feelings, but Sarah had no words for the emptiness inside her. She wanted her old life back. She wanted to rewind time to before the text message, before the lies, before everything fell apart. On a particularly dark night in November, sitting alone with a bottle of wine she wasn't drinking, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't stay in Boston. Every street corner held memories of James, of who she used to be, of the life she had lost. She needed to disappear, to go somewhere completely different, somewhere she had no history and no ghosts waiting around every corner. She opened her laptop and searched for the most remote place she could find in America. That search led her to South Dakota, to the Pine Ridge Reservation, to a volunteer teaching position that needed someone immediately and asked very few questions. The drive from Boston to South Dakota took 3 days. Sarah pushed through state after state, watching the landscape transform from autumn trees to flat prairies to badlands that looked like the surface of another planet. She drove until her eyes burned and her back ached, stopping only for gas and truck stop coffee that tasted like burnt regret. She didn't call anyone to tell them where she was going. She didn't want to be talked out of running away. Pine Ridge Reservation sprawled across the southwestern corner of South Dakota, a place of stark beauty and brutal poverty that shocked Sarah the moment she arrived. The volunteer coordinator, a kind Lakota woman named Mary Stands Tall, met her at the small school building that would become her workplace. Mary's eyes held a depth of understanding that made Sarah want to cry. The teacher housing was a small trailer on the edge of the reservation, basic but clean. Sarah unpacked her few belongings and stood in the middle of the empty space, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. The silence was different here. In Boston, silence was filled with the hum of traffic and distant sirens and neighbors moving through their lives. Here, silence was absolute, broken only by wind that howled across the plains like something alive and lonely. Teaching began the following Monday. Sarah's students were children from the reservation, their faces reflecting generations of hardship and resilience. They watched her with cautious eyes at first, testing this white woman who had appeared in their school. Sarah had been a substitute teacher before her marriage, filling in at various schools around Boston, but this was different. These children needed more than lesson plans and textbooks. They needed someone who saw them. The first week was overwhelming. Sarah stumbled through math lessons and reading assignments, painfully aware of how little she understood about Lakota culture or the challenges these children faced. But something began to shift by the second week. A girl named Wonbley, which Mary later told her meant eagle, started staying after class to help clean the classroom. She was 9 years old with braids so long they reached her waist and eyes that seemed far too serious for her age. Wonbley didn't speak much at first, but her presence became a comfort to Sarah. They would clean in companionable silence, and gradually, the girl began to share small pieces of her life. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Her father had died 3 years ago. She had 5 siblings. She loved to draw but never had enough paper or pencils. Sarah started buying art supplies with her meager salary, filling a corner of the classroom with paper and colored pencils and markers. Other children began joining them after school, the room filling with quiet concentration as they drew and painted. These moments became Sarah's anchor, the thing that got her out of bed each morning when the grief threatened to swallow her whole. 2 months into her time on the reservation, Sarah was invited to a community gathering. Mary insisted she come, said it would help her understand the people better. Sarah almost declined. The thought of socializing, of pretending to be okay, exhausted her. But something in Mary's expression told her this was important. The gathering was held in a large community hall decorated with traditional Lakota artwork and photographs of ancestors. Families filled the space with laughter and conversation in both English and Lakota. Sarah stood near the wall, trying to be invisible, when the room gradually fell quiet. A man had entered through the back door, and people turned to greet him with obvious respect. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with long black hair pulled back and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore jeans and a simple black shirt, but there was something commanding about his presence, something that made people naturally defer to him. Mary appeared at Sarah's elbow. "That's Lakota White Eagle," Mary whispered. "He's one of our tribal leaders. A chief, though he doesn't like that title much. He works with youth programs and cultural preservation. Good man. Lost his wife 5 years ago to cancer." Sarah watched as Lakota moved through the crowd, greeting elders with obvious affection, listening intently to whoever spoke to him. His face was striking, all sharp angles and strong features, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. They held the same kind of pain she saw in her own mirror, the kind that came from surviving something that should have destroyed you. Their eyes met across the room for just a moment, and Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a recognition she couldn't name. Lakota White Eagle noticed the white woman immediately. She stood against the wall like she was trying to disappear into it, her thin frame and haunted eyes marking her as someone carrying heavy grief. He had heard about the new teacher, the volunteer from Boston who had appeared at the school with no warning and very little explanation. Mary stands tall had mentioned her concern for the woman, said she seemed fragile but determined. After greeting the elders and checking on several families, Lakota found himself walking toward her. He told himself it was duty, making sure a newcomer felt welcome on their land. But something in her expression pulled at him, a mirror of his own loneliness reflected back. "You're the new teacher," he said, his voice deeper than Sarah expected. "Sarah Mitchell." "Yes." She extended her hand, surprised by the warmth and strength of his grip. "You're Lakota White Eagle. Mary told me you work with the youth programs. Among other things." His smile was slight but genuine. "How are you finding the reservation?" Sarah could have given him the polite answer, could have said everything was fine. But those dark eyes seemed to see straight through her defenses. "It's different from anything I've known. Beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time." Lakota nodded slowly. "That's more honest than most outsiders manage. Walk with me." They stepped outside into the cold November night. The sky was enormous here, filled with more stars than Sarah had ever seen. They walked in silence for a while, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Mary says you left Boston suddenly," Lakota said finally. "Running from something or toward something?" "Both. Neither. I don't know anymore." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "My marriage ended. Badly. I needed to be somewhere completely different." "So you came to one of the poorest places in America?" There was no judgment in his tone, just curiosity. "I came to somewhere that needed help. And maybe somewhere I could stop thinking about my own problems for a while." She glanced at him. "Is that selfish?" "No." Lakota stopped walking and turned to face her. "Pain makes us do strange things. After my wife died, I spent 6 months living alone in the Badlands, trying to understand why I was still here and she wasn't. My people thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I'm sorry about your wife. And I'm sorry about your marriage. He paused. What was his name? James. We were together for 15 years. He had an affair. When I found out, he said he was relieved. Like our entire life together had been a burden he was finally free of. Dakota's jaw tightened. Some people don't deserve what they're given. They walked in silence back toward the community hall. At the door, Dakota touched her arm gently. The children have been talking about you. They say you brought them art supplies. That you stay late to help anyone who needs it. That means something here. Sarah felt tears threatening and fought them back. They're good kids. They deserve someone who cares. So do you, Dakota said quietly, then walked back into the gathering. Over the following weeks, Sarah kept running into Dakota. He would appear at the school to talk to students about Lakota culture and language. He would be at the small grocery store when she stopped for supplies. He would be at community dinners that Mary insisted Sarah attend. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. He told her about his wife Ayanna, how cancer had taken her piece by piece until there was nothing left but goodbye. She told him about James, about the text message, about the divorce that had carved out her insides. Winter arrived with brutal force. The reservation became a frozen landscape of snow and ice and wind that cut through every layer of clothing. Sarah's trailer struggled to stay warm. One particularly cold night, her heating system failed completely. She woke at 2 in the morning, her breath visible in the moonlight streaming through her window, her entire body shaking with cold. She called Mary, but there was no answer. She sat on her bed, wrapped in every blanket she owned, trying to decide what to do. Then her phone rang. It was Dakota. Mary called me, he said without preamble. I'm outside your trailer. Grab what you need for the night. You can't stay here without heat. Sarah wanted to protest, to say she could handle it, but her teeth were chattering too hard to argue. She threw clothes and toiletries into a bag and stumbled outside. Dakota's truck was running, warm air blasting from the vents. He took her bag and helped her into the passenger seat, his hand steady on her elbow. He drove to his home, a modest house on tribal land that felt warm and lived in. Guest room is ready, he said, showing her to a small bedroom with a thick quilt on the bed and Lakota artwork on the walls. Bathroom is across the hall. Make yourself comfortable. Sarah should have felt awkward, staying in a man's home after knowing him only a few weeks. But something about Dakota's presence felt safe, solid, like standing on firm ground after months of quicksand. Morning arrived with weak winter sunlight and the smell of coffee. Sarah emerged from the guest room to find Dakota in the kitchen, making breakfast. He glanced at her and gestured to the coffee pot. Help yourself. I wasn't sure how you take it. Black is fine. Sarah poured a cup and wrapped her hands around its warmth. Thank you for last night. I would have frozen. The heating company is coming to your trailer today. Mary arranged it. Dakota flipped eggs in a pan with practiced ease. Until then, you should stay here. The storm's supposed to get worse. The storm did get worse. What was supposed to be a single night became 3 days as wind and snow transformed the reservation into an Arctic wilderness. School was cancelled. Sarah found herself snowbound with Dakota White Eagle, and something shifted between them in the forced intimacy of those 3 days. They talked for hours, sitting by his fireplace while the storm raged outside. Dakota told her about growing up on the reservation, about the traditions his grandmother had taught him, about the responsibility he felt to his people. He spoke about Ayanna, how they had grown up together, how losing her had felt like losing part of his own soul. His voice would break sometimes, and Sarah understood that pain, the way grief ambushed you when you least expected it. Sarah told him things she had never told anyone. About how she had lost herself in her marriage, becoming smaller and quieter until she barely recognized her own reflection. About the shame she felt for not seeing James's affair sooner, for not being enough to keep him faithful. About the panic attacks that still woke her in the middle of the night, gasping for air and clawing at her chest. You think it was your fault, Dakota said on the second night, firelight casting shadows across his strong features. You think if you had been different, better, more of something, he wouldn't have betrayed you. Wasn't it? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. No. Dakota leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. His choices were his own. His weakness, his dishonesty, his cowardice. You loved him completely, and he threw that away. That's on him, not you. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. She hadn't let herself cry in front of anyone since the divorce, but something about Dakota's certainty, his absolute conviction in her worth, broke through her defenses. He moved beside her on the couch and pulled her against his chest, his arms strong and steady around her shaking body. She cried for everything she had lost, for the life she would never have, for the years wasted on a man who hadn't deserved her love. When the tears finally stopped, Sarah pulled back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I've completely fallen apart on you." "Good." Dakota's hand cupped her face, his thumb wiping away the last tears. "You've been holding that in too long. My grandmother used to say tears are how the spirit cleanses itself. Let them come when they need to." Something electric passed between them in that moment. Sarah became acutely aware of how close they were, of the warmth of his hand against her cheek, of the way his eyes dropped briefly to her lips before rising again to meet hers. The air felt charged, full of possibility and danger. Dakota cleared his throat and stood, putting distance between them. "It's late. You should get some rest." The storm broke on the fourth day. Sarah's trailer was repaired and warm again, but returning to it felt wrong somehow. She had grown accustomed to Dakota's presence, to the sound of his voice and the solid comfort of knowing he was near. They had crossed some invisible line during those snowbound days, moving from strangers to something undefined but significant. Dakota started appearing at her classroom more frequently. He would bring lunch and they would eat together, talking about the students or reservation politics or nothing in particular. He invited her to sweat lodge ceremonies and talking circles, introducing her to Lakota traditions with patient explanation and quiet pride in his culture. Sarah began to understand the depth of what had been taken from Native people, the systematic destruction of language and tradition and identity that continued even now. One Saturday, Dakota took her to the Badlands, to the place where he had spent those 6 months after Ayana's death. They hiked through formations that looked like sculptures carved by ancient gods, layers of stone in impossible colors rising from the prairie floor. "This place saved me," Dakota said as they stood on a ridge overlooking the vast emptiness. "After Ayana died, I wanted to die too. I came here because I thought maybe if I was alone enough, in a place harsh enough, I could just fade away into the earth. But the land wouldn't let me go. Every morning the sun rose. Every night the stars came out. Life continued whether I wanted it to or not." "How did you find your way back?" Sarah asked. "I realized that grief wasn't something to get over or escape from. It was something to carry, to integrate into who I was becoming. Ayana's death changed me forever, but that didn't mean my life was over. It meant I had to learn how to live as this new version of myself." Sarah turned to him, this man who had appeared in her life when she was most broken. "You're helping me do the same thing. Learn how to be this new version of myself." Dakota took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. The touch was simple but profound. "You're stronger than you think, Sarah Mitchell. You left everything familiar and came to one of the hardest places in this country. You show up every day for children who desperately need someone to care. You're already becoming who you're meant to be." They stood together on that ridge as the sun set over the Badlands, painting the stone formations in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah felt something unfold in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Spring arrived on the reservation with unexpected gentleness. Snow melted into prairie grass that grew green and wild. Sarah had been in South Dakota for 6 months, and the woman she had been when she arrived seemed like a stranger now. She had gained back the weight she had lost, her face fuller and healthier. The panic attacks had diminished to occasional moments of anxiety that she could breathe through. She laughed with her students and looked forward to each day instead of dreading it. And there was Dakota. What had started as friendship had deepened into something neither of them could deny anymore. They spent nearly every evening together, cooking meals in his kitchen, walking across the prairie, talking for hours about everything and nothing. The physical attraction simmered between them constantly, but Dakota held back, giving her space to heal fully before they crossed that final line. Until one night in April when Sarah decided she was done waiting. They were at his house, dishes from dinner still on the table, when she walked to where he stood by the window and kissed him. Dakota went still with surprise for half a second, then his arms came around her and he kissed her back with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Sarah," he breathed against her lips. "Are you sure? I don't want you to do this if you're not ready." "I'm sure." She looked up at him, this man who had saved her life without even trying. "I've never been more sure of anything." That night, Dakota loved her with a reverence that made her cry. He touched every scar on her body and soul with gentle hands and patient understanding. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies and needs, whispering confessions in the darkness. Afterward, Sarah lay in his arms and felt something she thought she would never feel again. Peace. Their relationship became public knowledge quickly. The reservation was small, and word traveled fast. Sarah worried about judgment, about being an outsider in a relationship with a respected tribal leader, but the community surprised her. Mary stands tall hugged her fiercely and whispered, "About time." The elders welcomed her to more ceremonies and gatherings. Her students drew pictures of her and Dakota holding hands, their innocent approval more meaningful than any adult blessing. But not everything was easy. One evening, Dakota's brother-in-law Tom came to the house, his face tight with anger. He spoke in rapid Lakota to Dakota, his gestures sharp and accusatory. Sarah understood enough to know he was angry about their relationship, about Dakota being with a white woman when Ayanna had been gone only 5 years. Dakota's response was firm and unyielding, his own Lakota rapid-fire and commanding. The conversation ended with Tom leaving, but the tension remained. That night, Dakota held Sarah close and explained that some people saw their relationship as a betrayal of Lakota tradition, of Ayanna's memory, of everything he should represent as a leader. "Does his opinion matter to you?" Sarah asked quietly. "No." Dakota kissed her forehead. "You matter to me. What we have matters to me. I loved Ayanna with everything I had, and her death nearly destroyed me. But she's gone, and I'm still here, and I've found something beautiful with you. I'm not betraying her memory by choosing to live again." Summer brought Sarah's contract renewal decision. The school offered her a permanent position, a real salary, a future on the reservation if she wanted it. It also brought an unexpected email from James. He was getting married to the woman he had left her for. He wanted Sarah to know so she wouldn't find out through mutual friends. The email was brief, almost clinical, ending with "I hope you found happiness too." Sarah read it twice, waiting for the pain to hit, for the panic to rise in her chest. But nothing came. She felt nothing but a distant curiosity about the stranger who had once been her husband. She deleted the email and walked outside to where Dakota was repairing the fence around his property. "James is getting married," she said, handing him a water bottle. Dakota straightened, searching her face. "How do you feel about that?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Indifferent. Like hearing news about someone I used to know a long time ago. Is that strange?" "No." Dakota pulled her close, his work-roughened hands warm on her back. "It means you've healed. It means you've moved on." "I have." Sarah looked up at him, this man who had taught her how to live again. "I'm renewing my contract. I'm staying." The joy that flooded Dakota's face made Sarah's heart soar. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing in a way she rarely heard from him. When he set her down, he cupped her face in both hands. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. When you're ready. Marry me and be my wife and let me spend the rest of my life showing you what real love looks like." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears, healing tears. "Yes. Someday. When I'm ready. Yes." That fall, Sarah stood in a traditional Lakota dress that Mary and the elder women had made for her, waiting to marry Dakota White Eagle in a ceremony that blended native tradition with their own personal promises. Her sister Emma had come from Boston, crying happy tears and whispering that she had never seen Sarah look so radiant. Wandley and her other students sat in the front row, their faces glowing with pride. As Sarah walked toward Dakota, who stood tall and proud in traditional regalia, she thought about the broken woman who had fled Boston a year ago. That Sarah had been shattered by betrayal, hollowed out by loss, convinced she would never be whole again. This Sarah was stronger, braver, more authentically herself than she had ever been. She had been broken, yes. But in the breaking, she had found the courage to rebuild herself into something better. Dakota's eyes shone with emotion as she reached him. He took her hands and spoke his vows in both Lakota and English, promising to honor her strength, protect her heart, and walk beside her through all the seasons of life. Sarah spoke her own vows, promising to love him with everything she had learned about love, to respect his culture and his people, to be his partner and his equal in all things. When they kissed, the community erupted in celebration. Sarah and Dakota turned to face their people, their hands clasped together, their futures intertwined. The reservation that had once seemed like the edge of the world now felt like the center of everything that mattered. That night, lying beside her husband in the darkness, Sarah whispered, "Thank you for saving me." Dakota pulled her closer. "You saved yourself. You just needed a safe place to do it." Maybe he was right. Maybe she had saved herself. But he had given her the space and support and love to do it. He had shown her that betrayal didn't have to be the end of her story, just the beginning of a different chapter. She had been broken by marriage once. But she had been transformed and healed by love, by community, by choosing to be brave enough to start over. As sleep claimed her, Sarah's last thought was of gratitude. For the courage that had brought her to South Dakota. For the students who had given her purpose. For Mary and the community who had welcomed her. And most of all, for Dakota White Eagle, the chief who had loved her back to life.